Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Before we get into today's episode, we wanted to let you know about another podcast you may want to check out, the Sales Podcast with Wes Schaefer. Wes, who's known as the Sales Whisperer, helps salespeople everywhere generate more inbound sales that close faster, easier, at higher margins, with less stress and more fun. Our favorite episode on his show is titled Why You Need to Build for the Next Recession. Check it out and find the Sales Podcast wherever you do your podcast listening. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today, I'm joined by Kyle Coleman. He is the VP of Revenue Growth and Enablement over at Clari. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
I am living the dream. Thank you for having me, Logan.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Your content has been on fire on LinkedIn. James and I both commenting on stuff that you've been putting out and commenting on lately. And we thought, man, we've got to get Kyle on the show. So thank you so much for joining us, man. We're going to be talking about scaling personalization. How can you do that effectively? How can you avoid, going beyond that point of diminishing return with personalization and do it efficiently? Before we do that, man, let's set the table a little bit. Share with folks a little bit about yourself and what you and the Clari team are up to these days.
Sure. Yeah. So I started my career in B2B tech about 7 or 8 years ago at a company called Looker based in Santa Cruz. I was the 6th employee at Looker, was there for about 6 years until the company grew to about 800 employees and then was acquired by Google in the summer of 2019. I then jumped over to Clari to lead sales development and sales enablement in April of 2019. And as the year progressed, the company grew and there was a little bit more room for growth. I ended up taking on a few more departments on the demand marketing and field marketing side. So I now lead our newly formed growth department, which is a combination of demand generation, field marketing, as well as sales development and sales enablement.
Awesome, man. I love to hear that about your journey. Yeah, I've known a couple of people who have been on that Looker ride that you were on there. I think there's probably something as well in the way that you guys are organizing your go-to-market team there at Clari, the way you described the building of the growth team. But we'll have to revisit that another time. I want to dive straight into personalization, man, as we're talking about it today. I think this first point about outreach fatigue is something that a lot of our listeners kind of understand, but let's just for a minute, man, tell us a little bit about your thinking about why this is such an important topic for sales and marketing professionals right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Logan, because what has happened over the years is just as marketing automation tools like Marketo and Eloqua became sort of the table stakes for marketing teams, the same has happened with sales automation and sales acceleration tools like Outreach and SalesLoft. And what that means, unfortunately, is that a lot of salespeople have become kind of lazy when it comes to their outreach, where they just rely on these prescribed and pre-written and templatized email touches and LinkedIn touches, for that matter, that just completely inundate their prospects' inboxes without any real semblance of rationale or intent or personalization in the message. So these messages just pile up in prospects' inboxes, and therefore prospects are more predisposed to ignoring everything than engaging with anything. And that is the major problem we face now.
Yep, absolutely. And so when you're trying to reach even more fatigued buyers, then you've got an uphill battle to climb. I mean, I can just, you can't see me on video right now, but I'm waving my hand at my email inbox and my LinkedIn messages and connection requests full of stuff like that lately, just from this past week, from Monday to now. And part of it hits on what you talked about. It doesn't have any rationale. Even if it doesn't have personalization, at least if it's rational, then I might give it at least a 3-second glance instead of one. But when
Right.
there's just no rationale for it, that is what kind of irritates me and just makes me feel sad for the wasted time and wasted dollars for revenue teams that are trying to go to market that way. So we're going to be talking about some specific ways. You did a LinkedIn post that broke down some very specific how-tos on scaling personalization. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's talk a little bit about the first stage that you recommend for sales development and other folks who are crafting these outreach messages. Let's talk about tying your research and the importance of research and tying that to your value prop. And then we'll get into some of the tactics on how to personalize at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of a misconception, I think, as it relates to research where some people think that they need to know every single thing about a person or about a company in order to craft an effective message to that person. And that's just not true. You alluded to it at the top of the intro here, where there are diminishing returns as it relates to the time spent doing research. So what I try and preach with the team is spend about 5 minutes doing the research and about 5 minutes crafting the email. And if you can send an email, and it takes time, of course, it's way easier said than done. But if you can abide by that 5 and 5 rule, you're going to be in really good shape, and you'll realize the right things to personalize and the right things to templatize. So when you're doing your research, there are a few different categories that I think are really important to try and look for as you're trying to figure out how to craft this message. There's research on the company. There's research on the industry or the persona that you're reaching out to. And then there's actual personal research that you're doing about that person. Like, for example, the personal research, if you're going to do research on me, go to my LinkedIn page. You can see everything that I'm about, from the things I care about in the office and at work to things in my personal life. Like I put on my LinkedIn profile that I'm a corgi owner, just to see how much corgi swag people will send me. But it's that kind of thing that you'd be amazed at how open people are about their personal interests and how easy it is. And we'll get to the segue portion later, but how easy it is to segue from that personal research into the value prop for your company. So those other two categories, the company research, who are they hiring? What have their growth trends look like over the last 3 or 6, 12 months? What kind of press releases have you seen that their executives are quoted in? What can you glean from their mission statement, the company's mission statement? Things like that just show the prospect that you've taken the time to understand their company a little bit better. And then the same is true with industry or persona-based research. What are their competitors doing? Surface up some sort of competitive insight that maybe they don't know about. What kind of trends are they facing in the industry? What kind of statistics can you bring to the fore that will be relevant to their persona? It's those sorts of things that really catch my eye and show me that the person reaching out to me really does care. Not just about me and my company, but about solving problems that I have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you break down the 3 types of personalization based on company, or types of research that lead to types of personalization, I guess. Company, industry, and persona, and then personal. I mean, you should definitely, the industry and the persona, some of that hopefully is already done by the time that you see some of your templates and your go-to-market messaging, but invest more time there. Become an expert, because it's only going to pay dividends, because that is repeatable. It's not as custom as to each and every person, but the more that you can show that you have your finger on the pulse and you actually understand things that are going on with your buyer persona and in their industry. You bring up some really good points there too, Kyle, talking about who are they hiring. Look at their jobs postings. What are their growth trends? I mean, that's so easy to look at with LinkedIn Sales Navigator on headcount, and revenue, or look at tools like Crunchbase as well. PR statements, mission statement, I get a little bit iffy on, because James and I talked about this the other day, talking on the show about how we crafted our mission statement and how we feel that, a lot of companies, they don't do a very good job of actually, pushing that out into the culture. So to me, sometimes that might lead to something like, oh yeah, I didn't know that was our mission statement, right? So maybe be careful with that one a little bit. But I love all of those. Definitely tell me a little bit about how you look at the transition point, man, from research to value prop, and then we'll get into some specifics of where to personalize, where to rinse and repeat, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, totally. So I mentioned that I was a corgi owner, and I put that on my profile on LinkedIn. And somebody from a competitor to Outreach and Sales Loft, a smaller kind of upstart company that's in that same sales automation space, reached out to me and said, much like a corgi, we are small but mighty. And I was like, that's perfect. Like, that's the segue that caught my eye. And like, that's a silly example, obviously, but that kind of thing, it works. It's amazing. One of the SDRs on our team was doing some research on a person, and they found their Twitter profile. And on their Twitter profile, this person was very much about landscape paintings. And so, and also had some callback to their home country, somewhere in Western Europe. I can't remember where. And what our SDR did was they went and they found a landscape painting on Amazon, shipped it to that person. And the message had something to do with how, just like, you are interested in these beautiful paintings, Clari can help paint a picture of your entire revenue operations or organization. It doesn't need to be exactly by the book segue, but just the connective tissue between the research and the value prop for the company. It can be relatively tenuous. Obviously, the more concrete, the better, but it doesn't need to be a perfectly crafted sort of segue. You just need to help the person connect the dots a little bit more. This is easier to do with things like growth trends, where you can, say you're growing very quickly. Here's how Clari can help you onboard faster, implement process faster, whatever it may be, standardize that sort of onboarding flow. You just find the right way to tie or to build that connective tissue between the research you've done and the value that your company is bringing. A lot of times people ignore this step completely, and therefore the personalization is wasted because the email doesn't seem genuine. It seems like it doesn't flow. It just feels too salesy. It's kind of it's too obvious. You know what I mean? So there needs to be some sort of link between the two things.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. You probably already know that we think you should start a podcast if you haven't already. But what if you have and you're asking these kinds of questions? How much has our podcast impacted revenue this year? How's our sales team actually leveraging the podcast content? If you can't answer these questions, you're actually not alone. This is why Casted created the very first content marketing platform made specifically for B2B podcasting. Now you can more easily search and share your audio content while getting greater visibility into the impact of your podcast. The marketing teams at Drift, Terminus, and here at Sweetfish have started using Casted to get more value out of our podcasts, and you probably can too. You can check out the product in action at casted.us/growth. That's casted.us/growth. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something else to think about is maybe you make that sort of really personal touch, which I've seen people post on LinkedIn and give shout outs to SDRs for going that extra mile. Kind of bucket your leads, bucket your accounts. Like, don't send everybody a painting. That's not what we're saying, but you should be tiering your accounts that you're going after. The other thing is that as you do that personalization research on the company, I've heard Joe Caprio, VP of Sales over at Chorus, talk about, how many reps are failing to effectively multi-thread and the astronomical amount of increase that can have for your productivity as a sales rep. So I think we've got to combine those two, right? If you're doing this research on the company, don't just wait, quote unquote, waste it by just personalizing around one person. Go after, that other influencer and who you think is the target decision maker as well. And then you can have multiple touches that are more kind of that concrete connection, and maybe one that's a little bit more of a stretch or designed to make them smile, like the corgi or the painting reference. I heard Jason Bay of Blissful Prospecting talking on Scott Ingram's podcast, Daily Sales Tips, the other day, talking about, hey, we come up with all these ideas, all these value props, and then we blast them all in the first email. It's like, oh no, we know it takes 7 to 8 touches. Spread them out. Have
Drip
them more
them.
creative, have them more straightforward, and spread them out over your sequence. What do you think about that, Kyle?
I could not agree more. If you go through the effort to do all of that different research and you get 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, data points that you can personalize around, drip it throughout the course of the sequence. There's no reason to shoot it all out in one message. You got to multiply your chances because your prospects' inboxes are so flooded with outreach. There's no guarantee that they're going to even see your first mail, let alone respond to it. The other thing that I would say, Logan, that's related to that is reuse your research in those multi-threaded channels. There is absolutely no shame in sending a similar, not the same, but sending a similar message on LinkedIn as you send via email. And the other extension of that is on the phone. Your voicemail should be research oriented. It should be very similar to the messaging that you sent via email. That way, if they listen to your voicemail, they search for your name in the inbox and they get a similar sort of written message. It should be make the experience for your prospect as consistent as possible. It's hugely valuable and it's a really nice way to be able to reuse that research that you do a few different times.
Yeah, it's like what we talk about as marketers, don't just create one piece of content to use it once, like Gary Vee talks about content on content on content. It should be repurposed at least 3, 4, 5 different ways. We should think about that with our personalization and our messaging in sales development and go-to-market teams. So let's talk a little bit about some of your practical how-tos, Kyle, on when and where to personalize in your outbound messaging, man.
Yeah. So personalize the subject line, obviously, and personalize the intros to your emails. And the reason that this is so important is because every email client, for the most part these days, shows both the subject line as well as a preview of the mail itself. So you'll get, somewhere between 10 or 20 words that they can see before they even open your email. So make sure that that's personalized. It increases the chance that they open your email to begin with. The call outs to the research that you've done obviously need to be personalized in every single personalized message you send. And then the segue between that research and your company's value prop, it has to be personalized. And there are ways, like you just mentioned, if you're reaching out to the same or different people at the same company with the same piece of research, then that segue, of course, can be the same for those 2 different mails. But you need to templatize those things: intros, call outs, and segues. And then you can templatize things like your company's value prop. Your company's value prop should be A, written by, and B, approved by product marketing. They are the best people at communicating the value of your product. So you use that and templatize it. And yeah, it should be tailored for a persona or industry, but there's no reason for an SDR or a salesperson to be rewriting a company's value prop every single time they write a personalized note. And then calls to action. Calls to action should always be templatized and be as uniform as possible. A lot of times SDRs and salespeople get in their own heads about, crafting these really elegant calls to action for different levels of seniority and things like that. It's just not worth the squeeze. So templatize the calls to action and templatize the pain points that you're solving for that person or for that company. And you'll multiply the effort significantly. Again, this is what will allow you to abide by that 5 minutes of research, 5 minutes of writing sort of principle. So you can try and send out a personalized note every 10 minutes.
Yeah, I love it, man. So for folks to recap a little bit there, what you are recommending is those first 3 points: the subject and first line of the email, the research and the transition. And then you want to lean more on your templates for that value prop. Obviously, you want to have different ones to choose from for persona and industry, but you should be choosing them, not writing them from scratch. And then the calls to action, like you said, one of my favorite expressions is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And it's just not in that area to become super custom, because if you've gotten them there, you've done a good job of hopefully driving them to that call to action. I don't think that a difference in that last line of the call to action is really going to make a big difference. I love that you pointed out the first line, though. That's such a big thing. I've been recommending to folks, when you send a LinkedIn connection request, when you personalize it, don't put a line break after you say, "Hi, Kyle," comma, like put "Hi, Kyle," comma, or "Hi, Kyle," space, dash, and then space, and then keep on that first first line, because much like in email, that preview that you get isn't the whole thing, right? When you get a connection request, it's usually on those first 1 to 2 lines. So maximize that real estate where you're doing the personalization. So odds are, it's going to be seen. I also love what you said about not being afraid to reuse that personalization. It shouldn't be the exact same message, but I think we get this in our head of like, oh, they're going to see that I referenced the corgi on LinkedIn and email. Well, one, they're probably not going to. They're probably only going to see one of them, right? Just because the the odds of what's going to happen. And two, if they do, if they're not the exact same thing, I don't think they're going to fault you for it because they've seen, kind of the double effort. Anything else that you want to add to this today, man?
Yeah, one last thought. This pertains less to personalization and more to kind of email best practices, but something that I got in the habit of doing early in my SDR career, and the message that I preach now to all SDRs and salespeople is, before you send your personalized emails, read them out loud, like literally read them out loud to yourself or to somebody on your team, and you'll realize that your first draft is too long. You need to cut some things out. You'll realize a lot of times that your message is more about you than it is about them. And so you need to not use the word I as much as possible. Avoid the word I. And also what you'll find is you're too formal when you're writing emails. People err on the side of formality for some reason. And there's a major difference between formality and professionalism. You always want to be professional, but you don't want to be overly formal. That's like the number one indicator to me that this is not an email written by a human, is when it starts with "Dear Sir" or "Madam." Like, that's not ever anything I would ever want to read. So read your emails out loud. I know it can be a little painful at first, but again, this is meant to engender consistency. If you are writing in your voice, then when you're speaking to that person, obviously in your voice, there will be a very consistent experience across those different channels. So highly recommended.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that James and I talk about a lot is take that copy, whether it's a marketing email, a sales outreach email, copy on a landing page or whatever, read it out loud. And can you picture yourself saying that to a buddy at a bar or a coffee shop or whatever the case may be? So do that in the office. Just take it and read it out loud. One of the things I do more for podcast solo episodes, but also for other sorts of content, including outreach messages, is to open up Google Docs. Turn on the voice typing and then just talk it out. Now, of course, the voice typing isn't perfect and you got to clean it up for grammar and that sort of stuff. But it kind of removes that disconnect of, oh, my fingers are touching the keyboard. I have to say, "Dear Sir," or "Hello, Kyle." Why not say, "Hey, Kyle"? I would say, "Hey, Kyle," if I, was just talking to you. So it just makes some of those subtle shifts that people can pick up on. I love that you also said limit the use of I, and I would say also limit the use of we, especially in that subject line and in that first line. Todd Capone, who's the author of The Transparency Sale, has been a guest on this show before. He calls that weeing all over someone's inbox because it's we are this, we are the premier leader. They don't care, right? And don't say clients like this or this. No, change the wording to where it says you. See how many times you can fit the word you into that email and make it short, and you're going to be set up for pretty good success, man.
100% agreed.
I love it. Kyle, I could chat with you on all this stuff all day long, but for the sake of time, we're going to call it for today. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, which I highly recommend that they do, or follow along with your content or learn more about Clari and what you guys are up to, what's the best way for them to take action on any of those things, man?
Yeah, my most active social channel is LinkedIn by far. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. My username is Kyle T. Coleman. So yeah, come and find me. I'm always happy to chat, talk shop, trade best practices, whatever it is. I would appreciate the outreach.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Logan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.